Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Is Kanye West going broke? Following his repeated troubling remarks about George Floyd, Jewish people, and his continued close association with known white supremacists, the entertainer known as Ye faces some serious financial issues, and we'll dig a little into that. Also, Brett Favre, the retired NFL football player who received millions of dollars from Mississippi's welfare system, is asking a judge to remove him from a lawsuit where the state is trying to recoup as much as $77 million in funds taken from the welfare system in Mississippi. The real question is why Favre hasn't been charged with a crime. That's the real question. But first, we began with a major guilty verdict against the leaders of the Oath Keepers from the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol. And we do all that with attorney Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm in New Jersey. Good morning, Attorney Tarver. There he is.
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning.
Good to see you as always. Attorney Tarver, Stewart Rhodes, the leader of the far-right Oath Keepers militia, was convicted on Tuesday along with one of his subordinates of seditious conspiracy as a jury found him guilty of seeking to keep former President Donald Trump in power through an extensive plot that started after the 2020 election and culminated in the mob attack on the Capitol. This is a serious charge. I understand he's facing up to 60 years in prison.
Well, yeah, interestingly enough, no American has ever been convicted of seditious conspiracy. The last time the government tried it, they failed. And so for so many years, decades, they haven't even tried to use this particular charge because it is so difficult to prove. You have to actually prove that individuals in concert with other individuals, acting with other individuals, attempted to overthrow the government of the United States. Here, it was a lot easier because we now live in a technological age unlike any other. And so you've got all these texts from Stewart Rhodes between himself, other Oath Keeper members, and other members of even government that show what his intentions were. We didn't have to guess what was on his mind here. On his mind here were very clear intentions of overthrowing the United States government on January 6th.
And so what's the scenario? I mean, they say up to 60 years in prison. What's the likely scenario? I mean, you just said that this is the first time that someone's been convicted of such a charge. So perhaps that's hard to say the likely scenario, but is he gonna get those 60 years?
Seditious conspiracy carries with it a 20-year maximum sentence. There are other charges for which he was convicted, which carry with it a likely time. And that's how you get to the 60 years. But the one thing about the federal government system that's different than most state systems when it comes to a sentence is that we have what are called sentencing guidelines. And those sentencing guidelines basically lay out and give you points for what the actions that were taken. And so if the actions were taken in a certain way, you get a certain amount of points. If you have a prior record, you lose points. If it's in concert with other people, you get more and more points. Those sentencing guidelines are supposed to be advisory, but most judges will stick very closely to them. And those sentencing guidelines are extremely harsh. So it is very likely that Mr. Rhodes is going to do somewhere near that 20-year period of time. Now, the reason why I say the 20-year as opposed to the 60-year is the judges have the choice of whether to make certain charges consecutive. In other words, 20 years on top of 20 years on top of 20 years, which equals 60, or make them concurrent so that you would get 20 years on this charge, 20 years on that charge, 20 years on this charge, and they all run together at the same time. The likelihood here is you're not probably looking at 60 years, but I do believe because of the seriousness here and because of what the guidelines require, you're looking at least 20 years, and that is probably at least 1/3 of Mr. Rhodes' lifetime, if not more.
And it's certainly a message, right? Not just for Mr. Rhodes, but for any future attempts, because we still have a very tenuous political system in which this could happen again. And perhaps, Attorney Tarver, and perhaps you could speak to this, perhaps this is the deterrent necessary to prevent something like this from happening again.
Yeah, you know, the people talk about the criminal justice system having two prongs, one of which is retribution, which is not supposed to have, but the other is deterrence, punishment and deterrence. And the idea here, realistically, from the Department of Justice, was to make sure that this particular individual was convicted. Let me tell you, they are extremely excited now, because if he had not been convicted, it would have sent a different message. Understand that there are other individuals from the Oath Keepers in conspiracy. In fact, Stuart Rhodes' own attorney is getting ready to come up on trial sometime soon. But there are other individuals who still have to go to trial. And now they're looking at this and they see that the government is strong enough in its presentation of cases to actually get convictions. So you've got these individuals who are waiting out there in the wings. They're going to have to make a decision as to whether or not they're going to go to trial and risk everything, or whether or not they're going to try to enter to some sort of plea, or third option, enter some sort of plea that allows them to cooperate and give information on other individuals. Either way, coming back to what we said, this is a deterrent, because people who were bold enough to walk up into the Capitol on January 6th, people who were bold enough to clearly state in their texts and their emails and other documents that they are intent on overthrowing the government, now have to take a real hard look at their actions. And I got to tell you this as a last thing. You still have people who are looking over their shoulder. Just here in New Jersey, where I am, 3 people were arrested last week for the January 6th conspiracy, more than a year after. So people are looking over their shoulder. They're saying now that this thing is no longer the joke that they thought it was on January 6th.
Yeah, 2 years later, next month, January will mark 2 years. And so far, 900 criminal cases have come out of that. And they, as you just stated, someone just got arrested, and they're expecting, according to the U.S. Department of Justice, they're looking at even hundreds of more arrests. And here we are, nearly 2 years later. But what does this do also for Donald Trump? Here's one angle. If he gets back in, and this is something that Kanye West, and we'll talk more about Kanye West a little later, but he, in his discussion with Donald Trump, he was kind of pushing the former president. Why didn't you just pardon these people? If he gets back into the office, can he pardon these individuals, including Rhodes?
Well, technically, he probably could. The pardon, the ability of the president to pardon is one that has not been fully ferreted out, because we've never needed to do that before. We've always, in a number of ways, presumed that presidents would act in a manner that's consistent with honor and integrity. And in some cases, it's always been, there's been a kind of a close line. You remember the Clinton years where he pardoned a number of individuals that were involved in I guess it was Whitewater. But no one ever presumed that you would have a president who would act in a way that's consistent with seditious conspiracy and be in a position to pardon people who participated in that conspiracy. So that is a real question as to whether or not he could do that. But the bottom line is, realistically, people are wondering whether or not these actions, all of these actions in Donald Trump moving forward with his candidacy, could stop a conviction or stop an investigation. It can't. There's nothing of him being a candidate. There is nothing of him declaring himself as president. There is nothing that could stop this thing from moving forward. He could be indicted tomorrow, and there's nothing statutorily that could stop the Department of Justice from doing that.
It'll be interesting as we get closer and closer to the 2024 election. I mean, election season is going to get underway really quick too. So we'll see how this plays out.
You've been making football analogies. You know how it is when a defense, a receiver, starts to hear footsteps, which is when the defensive back is closing in on them. That's what Donald Trump has to be feeling now, because the Georgia prosecution, the Georgia grand jury, that is moving forward at lightning fast speed. They are interviewing people over and over and over again. And now you have a conviction on seditious conspiracy, and we know what the elements are. The elements are almost the same as what Donald Trump has participated in. Yeah. And so it's no longer looking like a impossibility. It's looking like a possible scenario for Donald Trump actually being convicted on the facts of what he actually engaged in on January 6th and all the activities leading up to January 6th.
That is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to say the least.
It already
Well,
is.
well, and speaking of investigations or perhaps lack thereof, attorneys for former NFL star Brett Favre filed court papers in Mississippi seeking to dismiss a civil lawsuit against him tied to a state welfare fraud scandal. Of course, Brett Favre was sued in May by the state welfare agency after he received $1.1 million in federal welfare funds intended to lift children out of poverty in the poorest state in America. Instead of helping families, the state says Brett Favre was paid to speak at 3 different public events and 1 keynote address, but it says no speeches ever occurred. Favre's attorneys say that he and his organization, Favre Enterprises LLC, repaid the funds, and that Mississippi officials are to blame for what he calls the misspending. Attorney Tarver, here's a case where somewhat a layman like myself, and so I've heard others talk about this. If that were me or someone else, we'd be behind bars right now, right?
So if I walk into the bank, the local bank, and I take $500 from the teller's drawer, I know I'm taking money, and I know what's criminal to do. I know it's wrong, and I take it. But then I get outside, and somebody catches me, and I say, "Oh, well, you know what? I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to repay it." Somehow, the suggestion is that I could be exonerated from the crime. That's what we actually have here with Brett Favre, because Brett Favre and his consortium of individuals knew that they were taking money under improper circumstances. They knew and had the intent of not complying with what they were supposed to comply with in a government contract. They knew that he was compensated, and they only paid back after the activity was found out. Now, if you're going to suggest that that's the way the justice system works for everyone, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn, New York. That's not the way that it works. And the fact of the matter is, he's getting a real humble here. He's getting over, and there's no reason why this should happen. And this shows your viewers and all of America the inequities in the justice system. First of all, you're talking about a civil prosecution here, which means that they're just seeking money damages. Where's the criminal prosecution? The fact of the matter is, what he did was illegal. Knowingly acting in a fraudulent matter is a crime, and Brett Favre should have to pay for it like every other individual. It just goes to show you that money talks, and you know what walks.
Well, and not only did he get the $1.1 million, but he also lobbied the governor and others to spend $5 million in taxpayer funds to pay for the construction of a volleyball facility at the University of Southern Mississippi, where his daughter played the sport.
Yes.
He texted Governor Phil Bryant, who was governor at the time, to push for state money to be invested in a Florida-based experimental drug company where he was the single largest independent investor.
Major stockholder.
Yeah.
This is insane.
Yeah.
It's absolutely insane. And put this in context. Mississippi is basically the poorest state in the union of 50 states. People are living below the poverty level at an astounding rate in Mississippi. And you're talking about government funds, taxpayer dollars, now going to Brett Favre's daughter so that she can play volleyball at the University of Mississippi, Southern Mississippi. Doesn't make any sense at all that there's not a criminal prosecution here. And the problem is there are not enough voices standing up and saying that there should be a criminal prosecution. That's probably in part because Brett Favre is a folk hero down in Mississippi. But the fact of the matter is, he, like everyone else, should have to deal with these consequences. Remember how they came after Mike Espy, down in Mississippi? Let's be real, for nothing. And Brett Favre has all of this in plain sight, and he's getting away with it.
Well, can the federal government step in? The Department of Justice step in?
Well, the problem is, I don't know that there is any federal crime or statute that's been offended here. You're talking about government funds. You're talking about state government funds. Look, I have seen prosecutions, and I have defended individuals who have been charged by the federal government based upon certain state actions. But I don't know enough about the funds here and whether or not there's a federal tie-in. To the extent that any of these funds may have been part of a federal program or may have been part of a federal grant, then yes, the federal government can step in. But again, unless there is a groundswell noise, real calling for this to happen, it's not going to happen, because people would rather this go away for this big hero than to see him fall. And we really need to be attentive to this, because if justice is going to stand for anything, it has to stand for some form of equality in prosecution. And we just don't have that here.
Yeah, this is, again, you're taking, like you've outlined, the poor is the poorest state in the nation, number one. And you're taking from poor people. I mean, if it's these are, and I hate to use this term, they're dirt poor people that you are stealing from. I mean, there's not many crimes that you can consider worse, is it?
First of all, let me amplify your dirt poor sentiment. I was in Mississippi recently. There are literally homes with dirt floors where people are living. They are dirt poor. The actual floor is nothing but dirt, but sand. So these are the poorest of the poor. This is the people that are in most need. And Brett Favre is a millionaire, a multi-millionaire. The question is, did you really need to do this for any purpose? It's not even a situation where he needed to line his pockets. It's a situation where he and others made deliberate choices, knowing that the money was prescribed for people who are poor, to say that it's not enough for me. I have to line my pockets even more. And you know, that's an area in which I think the Attorney General of that state really needs to take a hard look. Because, you know, ultimately, you're going to have people who come back, and this is what's not charged enough. You're going to have people who are going to come back and say, if you haven't prosecuted this individual for this crime, then you should not prosecute me for this. It's what's called selective prosecution. And when governments and attorney generals and prosecutors selectively prosecute others and don't prosecute others, they open themselves up for a charge of selective prosecution. And in a number of ways, sometimes, very rarely, that can be a successful defense to certain types of prosecutions.
So I drive somebody to the bank knowing that they're going to rob it. I don't participate, but I'm still guilty, right? Governor Bryant, we're talking about Brett Favre, but shouldn't he go down with that flame too?
Depending on what his level of knowledge was. The fact of the matter is, for a conspiracy, you only have to agree to do one thing that is improper. You don't even have to agree to the whole scope of the conspiracy. You can agree to one part of an illegal act. And if you agree to that one part, in for a penny, in for a pound, you're in for the entire scope of the conspiracy. So if the governor knew, and if the governor was at least part of that scheme, then the governor bears responsibility as well. But again, who is going to prosecute that? The Attorney General of the state, who in Mississippi, I believe, may be an appointee of the governor or of the same political party, and if not, works with the governor.
Oh, God.
You know, so this is why there really needs to be significant oversight. And if the DOJ can do something, the DOJ should do something. So they're moving right now to dismiss the lawsuit. You know, that's of no consequence. We don't care about it. Yeah, dismiss the lawsuit. The lawsuit's not important, because even if there is a judgment against Brett Favre, it's not going to deal with the criminal aspects of his behavior. So this is really just a sideshow, the fact that they even brought the civil lawsuit at this point. The fact that they brought the civil lawsuit suggests that they are clearly not thinking at all about a criminal prosecution. They expect that looking at this civil lawsuit, we, the public, are going to say, oh, wow, they're moving against Brett Favre. Boy, wow. No, this is nothing. It's just a civil act, and perhaps it may be dismissed.
Yeah, and really at this juncture, they're only looking to collect about $228,000 in interest or whatever they feel that Brett Favre still owes. So for Brett Favre to come out now and try and get this dismissed, it's ridiculous. Just pay the money you pay back the 1.1 million, just pay it and keep it moving, right?
Well, that's the arrogance of the whole thing. The arrogance of this whole thing is that by way of this lawsuit, they've actually accepted his version. They've accepted his version that he's not acting in a criminal manner, and they're saying, okay, well, you haven't paid back enough of what you're supposed to pay back. This is a sham. It is a group of individuals, unfortunately, who have gotten together and have decided how they're going to handle this in a non-criminal fashion. They've made their decision, and pretty much this is where we are. He's gotten away with it.
Actually, question: Herschel Walker, for instance,
Oh.
we know we know that he doesn't have any property in Georgia. And in fact, as recently as June, he talked about living his home being Texas. And is there any fraud here? Because he had to fill out those forms under penalty of perjury, right?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I think you kind of have to be a resident of the state of Georgia to be a representative in the Senate from the state of Georgia. So let's deal with that aspect first and foremost. Whether, I don't understand how it is that this is just now coming up. All right, but it is just now coming up. They've chosen not to deal with the Warnock campaign has chosen not to deal with this in any sort of filing at this point. My suspicion is that they believe that they have headwinds against them and they would rather win this thing outright. However, if you see that he loses this, I expect a full-on challenge as to Herschel Walker's candidacy. That's on the candidate side. Now, let's talk about the fraud side. The fact of the matter is, here's the big mistake that he made. The big mistake that he made is signing documentation that suggests that he lives in a state where apparently he does not live. That is a federal offense. And the fact of the matter is, people have got to start waking up to what the power of the federal government really is in these circumstances. These federal statutes for fraud, the federal statutes for false representations, misrepresentations on documents, misrepresentations to a federal agent, those things are onerous. You must do time in most cases for those types of offenses. And I would not be surprised to see people looking further into this. And I would not be surprised that if he does, and they can establish his residency in Texas, I would not be surprised to see him prosecuted.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either because, he is not the most liked or well-liked individual. Republicans are just using the guy. Let's face it. They're trying to get a seat. You or I can sit in that seat as far as Republicans are concerned, as long as we support their cause, their mission. So.
Well, people should stick to what they do. You don't see me trying to get out there, with a football and play with, in the NFL. I can't do it. I just can't do it. And
you'll be hearing those footsteps all the time.
Eastwood once said, "A man's got to know his limitations." Herschel hasn't been told about what his limitations are, but we see them every day.
Well, does Kanye West know his limitations, or is his limitations up? Because the IRS has put, according to Kanye, who now goes by Ye, the IRS has put a $75 million hold on 4 of his accounts. He said he owes about $50 million in taxes. Before his anti-Black, anti-Jewish rants, Kanye was said to be worth about $1.5 billion. That estimate quickly dwindled to about $400 million. Now, he not only has to pay the IRS back $75 million, but Adidas is said to be suing him for $225 million. And he just announced yesterday his divorce was settled with Kim Kardashian, and he's on the hook for more than $200,000 a month in child support. This guy, you talk about a fall. I mean, you fall, and sometimes you hit things on the way down. That guy just fell straight down.
Well, there's a certain sadness to this because it is obvious, I think, to most observers, and it was obvious for a very long time, that following the death of his mother, Kanye West suffered some significant mental difficulties. It is obvious in listening to him that there are some mental difficulties that are going on here. And it is obvious to anyone who's looking at what he's doing now that he hasn't gotten the help that he needs to get. Now that's a problem, and there's no one close enough to him to do it. Be that as it may, and you set that aside, the man is dangerous. And he's dangerous because he has waded into certain waters, certain political waters. From a historical perspective, he's being used as a black man for the destruction of black people. There's no question about that. When you see him walking around with a White Lives Matter t-shirt, that's no accident. He's being used to portray something that's detrimental to the black community, to portray a message that his handlers would like him to portray. And that's a huge problem. Do I think he stands a chance of going broke? Yeah. You know, if his mother were alive, she would have told him, don't go messing around with
stay out of those folks' business.
With certain people. You know, you got to know who to mess with and who not to mess with. And I'll leave it at that. But, you know, he has made some significant and serious mistakes here. And there is no one that seems to be looking out for his interests.
Yeah. And he keeps doubling down, tripling down on these things, and hanging out with white supremacists and those who are anti-Semitic or known to be anti-Semitic. This guy, he is. You talk about somebody glutton for punishment. My goodness, he's the epitome of someone glutton for punishment.
Yeah, you see Nick Fuentes you had up there, Milo Yiannopoulos.
Yes.
Those individuals are working with him now. And here's what really is happening. Here's the end game behind this whole Kanye West thing. Trump's former manager is now involved with Kanye West. This is not what they want to portray as an assault of Kanye West against Donald Trump. No. What this is meant, it is meant to be an attraction to black voters. You see, they still think, based upon Herschel Walker and other types of ideas here, that they can co-opt the black vote by way of its entertainment side. So, you know, they believe that Kanye West has enough of a following that he can siphon off black votes enough to allow Donald Trump to be able to be successful in a 2024 run. The whole idea that Kanye West has lined up with these individuals who are synonymous and have been part of the Trump campaign in the past, and we're supposed to think that that's not a scheme. This is a scheme, and this is the type of thing. And what it should show us is what they think about the level of sophistication of black people. This shows you just how little they think we are able to discern these types of tricks. But you know, the black community has grown so far beyond that.
And doesn't it also, Kanye's financial situation also seem to indicate something that is really, really interesting, that they can take it from you as a black person, as a black successful entertainer, as a black successful businessman. You're not necessarily, well, in Kanye's case, he certainly was beholden to others, right? It reminds me of George Jefferson. You know, George made this money, but he always seemed to be beholden to Mr. Whitendale. You know, and
we're telling our age here.
but you know, Dave Chappelle said it best, I think, on that, in that monologue. You know, that whole, why he didn't do a sneaker deal, why he didn't do this deal or that deal, because no one had a hold on him.
Yeah,
and that's why, despite they say he's been homophobic, transphobic, however you pronounce it, I don't mean any disrespect. And he's been even anti-Semitic, but he's not been someone that they've been able to cancel.
Yeah. Well, look, the problem with Kanye West is that Kanye West has delved into waters where his finances are vulnerable. Now, there are plenty of African Americans whose finances are not vulnerable. Robert Johnson, his finances were never vulnerable. Byron Allen right now, who was, you know, his finances are not vulnerable because they're in a position to control the assets where they are involved. Once you get involved in assets and areas where you don't have control, that's where you're vulnerable. Yeah, all right. You have a deal with Adidas. Look, if that's the deal and you keep your deal and you keep it going, you know, in the right fashion, you're not really vulnerable. But he placed himself in a position of vulnerability. And that's the danger when it comes to, look, comedians will do it all the time. Comedians are always in the danger zone. because part of comedy is the social commentary. That's what comedy really is. You've got to be able to make social commentary, and sometimes you're going to run afoul of certain areas. So I understand Dave Chappelle, but a person like Kanye West, he has deliberately injected himself into those areas, and that's not necessarily the case for all Black people and all people of color in terms of their funds. Now, we do enjoy a certain amount of vulnerability for being, for example, charged with certain acts that we may not have been committed, charged with certain things that they don't charge white politicians or white entertainers with. You know, you see white entertainers acting crazy every day, or you may not even see them because they don't show them, but they act as crazy as the Black entertainers, but you don't see them being charged on a regular basis like that. There is an intolerance that America has for Black successful people. And Kanye West, unfortunately, has flirted with that, and he's learning, to kind of paraphrase, mess around and find out. That's what has happened to him. He's made some decisions that put him in a vulnerable sphere.
Dave Chappelle said he tweeted that he was going DEFCON 3 in the morning, and Dave Chappelle said, I couldn't sleep. He said, I had to wait. I couldn't wait till the morning. What is he talking about now? But he has destroyed himself. He has no one to blame but himself here.
Yeah. And that takes us back to my original proposition. It's the actions are irrational. They make absolutely no sense. He makes absolutely no sense even when he's talking. Now, occasionally a good coherent thought will come out. And unfortunately, people will bite on that and say, hey, Ye says this and that makes perfect sense. But overall, the man is not making sense. And anytime that you put yourself in a position of destruction without a goal and a purpose that makes sense, that's an indication of mental illness. And that's what is the problem here, that you see people who are using him in his state of mental illness. And that is sad.
Along those lines, Britney Spears got a conservator. They placed her into a conservatorship, we know, for years and years, and she was finally able to get it removed. Can Kanye be placed under a conservatorship?
Look, one thing you'd have to, it would be similar to you'd have to have a real declaration that there were some mental issues.
Don't we get enough evidence?
So someone who is in standing to make that declaration would have to be able to do it. Now, usually, because Britney Spears' situation was a family situation, there's usually a family member who goes to a court and says, look, this person is acting irrationally. They've shown themselves not to be coherent, that they may be a danger to themselves or other persons through their actions. And the court will consider that and in many cases appoint a guardian over the individual to make sure the individual does not, lose everything. Who would do that here? His wife could have done it at the time. His wife, Kim Kardashian, could have done it at the time, but they were so busy making money off of him as well that I don't think they cared about it. That's my own, commentary and judgment on that.
And I agree. I agree 100%. They are toxic people, that's for sure. And that was
very wealthy toxic people.
Yes, and could care less about the next person. It makes you wonder sometimes if they really care about each other.
Well, they seem to be running a black man factory the way that they work through their families.
Without question.
It really reminds me of the movie Get Out, what I see happening in that house.
Oh God, it's like they go to a black man auction every so often and start bidding. It's just horrendous. I better stop now.
We probably both should.
Before I need to hire you. Attorney Robert Tarver of the Tarver Law Firm. It's always a privilege to have you on Let It Be Known. Thanks so much for educating us legally and otherwise. And thank you all for watching. We will see you tomorrow.